Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Center for Academic and Faculty Excellence webinar, Teaching Assistant, What to Expect and What It Is Expected. I am here, I'm Gloria González-Morales, I'm the Faculty Director of the Center, and I'm here co-hosting with Shelby Lamar, who's the Associate Director of CAFE, and we also have Gabby Robin, who's going to be helping out with surveys. She's the person in charge of all the administrative staff at CAFE as well. So we're going to start. I know that a lot of people wanted to be here, but they can't. So they will be watching this as a recording. If you're watching this now, hello, and happy that you came back to watch the recording. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the teaching assistant roles. So the first thing that we're going to do is to talk about meetings and the main tasks that you have to do as a TA, and that means entering your time in Workday. It is funny, but sometimes it's one of the most important things that you have to do, especially to get paid. And then we will talk a little bit more about potential TA problems that you may encounter and some tips that we can give you about it in terms of communication, grading, teamwork, and professionalism and ethics. And then we will answer all your questions, or at least as many questions as we can answer until 1 p.m. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to ask you is to go to menti.com, or you can also use your QR code to get there, and that's the code to get to our survey. Let me just open up this, because what I'm going to ask you is to reflect on your past experiences teaching or being a TA or even being a student. And as you reflect on those, this is again the code. I'm going to ask you which behaviors and actions define a good teaching assistant. I'm going to go back to the code in case you haven't had time to get in there. Okay. Cool. Okay, so we have 11 responses, and we have that someone is when they're compassionate, when they're welcoming, they are able to connect. Oh my God, now this is going to start changing. This is going to be hard. Approachable, listens well, is friendly, is proactive, is reassuring, is supportive, is inspiring, and is thoughtful. All of these are very good behaviors and qualities that a TA should have. So, okay, get this list in your brain and start thinking about how you can embody all these positive qualities when dealing with both the students in your class, but also with the professor that you're working with. Okay, and now this is another question. Examples of professors' behaviors that you think support TAs and facilitate student learning. Yes, taking time to. Okay, well, it looks very similar to what are the behaviors of TAs. So welcoming, caring, approachable, with a positive attitude, and able to clarify, and also to support, and able to give directions. And what else? clarity, clarify. It looks like to be clear is an important one. And fun. Okay, I didn't know that one was a good one. And approved. I wonder what approved means. Anybody care to elaborate on that? Well, we will learn at some point. What do you mean with approved? Okay, well, thank you. This is very interesting because it's telling us that both TAs and professors, we need to have this positive attitude, being supportive because we're supporting student learning. Okay, let's continue with then what does it mean then? First for our meetings with TAs, with professors. So if you haven't met yet, you should set up a meeting with the professor that you're TAing for, because you need to discuss with them what are the expectations that they have about your teaching assistantship, what are the expectations that they have about the students in the course. You need to have a clear idea of what the professor wants from the students in the course. And this is something that should be a continuous loop because you should be continuously clarifying as the semester advances that the way that you're helping the professor and helping the students is aligning with their expectations for students in terms of like what kind of activities, learning activities they have to do, what kind of professionalism and behavior in the class is needed, what kind of like accountability is set up in terms of like readings and having activities done. So that's why not only you need that continuous loop during the semester, but it's always a good idea to have some kind of mid-semester meeting with your professor, with the professor that you're working with, in order to ensure that continuous alignment between the professor, between you, and also with the students. There's also another meeting at the end that should be a wrap-up meeting or a post-evaluation meeting. You should, first of all, before you get there, you may want to ask the course professor at the beginning of the course if they're open to feedback. If so, what I would do is I would keep a list starting in the beginning of the semester about things that you think that could be done better, or you could fix, or could be helpful for a student learning. And that can be based not only on what you notice in class, but also what you hear from the students. Sometimes the students in teaching evaluations may not have enough time or energy to provide all the information that we want to provide in terms of constructive feedback. And sometimes they can just discuss it with a TA. You are so close to them, most of them are your peers, that you can have those honest conversations, and then you can take those honest conversations, process that information, and provide it to the professor at the end, or maybe in the middle, if it is something that can be changed in the meantime, as constructive feedback. So you can, leave behind all the personal comments or things that may not be constructive. You also could reflect on what you have learned and how you can make the class smoother and better for the next year. This means that you're going to help with the course redesign for the year after. And this could be something that you could add to your CV, and it could facilitate good references from, for example, the professor with whom you have been TAing. Something that some of my TAs have done in the past is that in Canvas, we have always in each module, we had a non-published page in that module where they would put a lot of information about things that needed to be fixed, activities that didn't work out, or activities that we thought afterwards that could have been modified somehow. So then when the professor imports all that course for the following year, those notes are there and we can check them out and redesign based on that. So that's important. And I think that's something that we never talk that much about, the role of the TA. And it's really important in order to improve the course year by year. You were talking about being supported, listening, having a positive attitude, all these things are related to our relationships with the students. The reason why teaching assistants are important over and above the idea of having someone else to do grading, or over and above helping the professor to manage the workload, is that there are three things that for me are important. One is that if we think about Vygotsky's theory about learning, there's something called the zone of proximal development. And that's a zone where you have a novice learner and you have an expert. The professor usually is the expert out here. The novice learner is usually here, really far away. And usually the novice is not going to learn all these in one sit, or even in one course. According to Vygotsky, there's a zone of proximal development that is kind of around here, like from the novice and in the middle. And this is where learning happens. A TA, if this is, I should have brought something like balls or something. If this is the professor and this is a novice, the TA usually sits here. So the TA actually is closer to the zone of proximal development of the student. And it can close that gap that comes from the zone of proximal development and the expert. Sometimes even like I may be talking like right now with like all my hands and everything, and you're probably going like, what is Vygotsky? What is she talking about? I'm not getting it. Like, because I may not be using the right wording or the right ideas to be in the zone of your zone of proximal development about this explanation of this theory. However, the TA, who's a learner who has learned all these things like last year, still has the ability to transition from a more expert zone to a proximal development zone. So that's one of the reasons why TAs are important. The second reason is that feedback from TAs add value when meeting with your prof. Like meetings with a professor may be charged with power dynamics. They may be charged with different dynamics in relationship to feeling like the professor doesn't know you that well, that they don't understand what you were trying to say. But a meeting with a TA, given that they are like closer in your zone of proximal development, can allow you to understand better what are the things that we're missing, for example, from an assignment. So as a TA, you want to play that role of value added to what the professor has said. You may be a translator from the feedback that the professor is given to what the student is understanding. And then there's also a third aspect of a TA that is not just grading. You should be able to guest lecture. You should ask the professor to see if you have a role in syllabus building for the current course or for future courses. And you are monitoring all the time what is going on. You may be monitoring that people are not understanding what the professor is saying. You may be monitoring that actually people are not being accountable. They are not finishing their readings. There's too much reading. There's a lot of things that a professor misses because of what I was saying about those power dynamics. Students don't want to tell a professor that you don't have time to do the readings, but they may share with the TA that they're struggling. And your role as a TA is to be able to convey that information. And also with a grain of salt, because you also are a student and you know how long it takes to do things and how to manage all that. So actually, if you think about it, the role of the TA is the most important role within a learning community, because you are going to be a translator, a negotiator, a mediator, and also you're going to be evaluating and providing feedback to students. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to ask if you have any questions right now about anything of what I have mentioned so far. I don't know if I see, I'm trying to see my chat, but no, there's no questions. Okay. Shelby, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that's a pretty good coverage of it.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, so let's go into the actual. I think that there's three types of tasks that if you had to leave the webinar with like a list of things that you have to remember to do as a TA, and those are managing the Canvas. And if you need help with figuring out how Canvas work, you can always come to Cafe and ask our fellows, and they can help you. Creating reminders for students and managing your own time. So in terms of Canvas, I would say that I never have a perfect Canvas page or system. The Canvas is your learning management system. If you're a TA in somewhere else and you may be using Blackboard, you may be using Moodle, you may be using Desire to Learn, you may be using Sakai. All those are LMS or learning management systems. There's always things wrong. So the most important thing is to monitor Canvas. So if you don't have anything to grade this week, but you need to put in your 10 hours, then what I would do is I will look into that LMS system and put a lot of attention to detail. Look at published content, look at deadlines, double check that the due dates are the ones that work. Look at the resources work, and that when there are links and that those links work. Also check that those links are the appropriate links. Like yesterday, we were talking about how sometimes professors think that the link that you take from the navigation panel is a link to the library resource, but it actually should be a permalink that you get from the search of that resource in library. So you can go to the permalink, and that's the one that you should put in there. Also double check that the assignments are clearly explained and dated correctly, that the rubrics are all in the right places, that there's rubrics and everything is aligned to the syllabus. I would say if there's no rubrics, maybe think about having a conversation with the professor to have a rubric, especially if you're going to be grading. We will be talking about that a little bit later, but those are very important because you're going to be grading your peers. So it's important that you know what are you grading them on and how are you assigning points if you're grading or giving feedback. In terms of reminders, remind the class if something is due the following week. You can use announcements tool in Canvas. But even though they have the calendar for the semester, it's not always easy to remember when things are due. Obviously, I am preaching to the choir. You know exactly how it feels to have 3-4 classes and just trying to manage everything at the same time. So if there's something like a big assignment due next week, tell people, or if there's a draft that is due, remind people that is due and how it should be submitted. So 1 week notice and maybe an announcement a few days prior, and actually announcing these things during class. So I usually talk to TAs to tell them like, okay, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes at the beginning of class and 5 minutes at the end of the class to make announcements about how things are going. Because my TAs usually manage that people are submitting their things, that they're having things set up. So they're the ones who actually know better than me if people are missing assignments, for example. So that's something that you may want to remind people. And then the last thing that is kind of like that, but it's very important, is that you manage your time and that you actually input it in Workday. The last time that I did this webinar, we had Chronos, and it was a little bit of, it was worse, and now it's better. I know that Workday is not perfect, but it's much better than Chronos. So think about paid hours and worked hours. If you work more than 10 hours a week, Shelby, double check with me, it's 10 hours, right?
That's the usual contract is 10 hours, but it can be different if they have a different setup.
Exactly. So, for example, I do have 2 TAs right now in my class, so they're doing half and half, so they're going to be doing 5 hours per week, each of them. You actually cannot work as a student more than 20 hours per week. So it may be that a week you work 12 hours, but at the end you have to like have an amount of hours that don't go over the 10 hours a week, multiplied by the number of weeks that you are TAing. if you don't put your hours in Workday, they don't get paid. So that's something that you have to deal with. And also think that meetings are paid hours and should be checked in Workday. Okay, so if you spend meetings with professors or meeting with the students, those should be paid hours. You don't have to work more than what your contract has. Okay.
I would just, something to add real quick is monitoring email and Canvas messages. It just takes like 5 minutes. I would check it once or twice a day to be sure you don't miss anything, because they might be much more likely to message you than the professors. So just so you don't miss something urgent, maybe like 5 minutes a day is a really great practice to keep in mind.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, a lot of professors say, "Don't email me, email my TA." I would say, like from a professor perspective, email both. So email the professor. If you are emailing the professor, always copy the TA. That's really important because sometimes the professor may think, well, this is it's an easy question for the TA to answer, so I'm not going to answer it. And if you only email me and I have 1,000 emails more to answer, and it's like a question that is in the syllabus or something like that, it may be that you don't get it answered. So, but anyways, so tell the students that you are available for email and to be copied every time that they send an email to the professor. Because also that way you are in the loop of what things are happening. So that's helpful. Okay, so this is a link, and I should have, let me see if I can just get it out and put it in the chat. So this is a link for you to know how to input your hours in Workday. I'm going to put it here. And I'm going to go there now. It's actually a PDF and it gives you a very clear instructions on how to enter your time as a student, employees, and this is the one for Workday. So it tells you like, just go to the menu, go to time, enter the time for this week, or if you did it last week, or select another week, and then you just put all the hours there. So you have all the information here. And you can also enter time weekly as well. Okay, so that's that. Sorry for the motion sickness here. Okay. So as I said, that's kind of like where you want to go to enter the time, and you have in the link that information. Let's talk now about frequent TA problems, unless you have any questions right now about what I have covered so far. Okay, it looks like we're good. So for example, there are problems like, for example, that there's no clear dialogue with the professor regarding the expectations of my role as a TA. And that usually happens when there's not a meeting at the beginning. The professor assumes that you know what you're supposed to be doing. You assume what you're supposed to be doing. And then in the middle of a semester, suddenly you have a ton of things to grade. You have a ton of things for you to also write for your own assignments in class. And you're like, what do I do with this now? So my suggestion is that if you haven't met, or even if you have met, but you haven't established clear expectations about what are your tasks, when are you going to be mostly busy, when are things due, and when are you expected to have things graded, you should have that meeting. And actually, you should have that meeting at the same time, like probably next week, with the actual deadlines for your own courses. So you can kind of line it up, create an alignment between when you have things due and when you actually have to be grading things. And that can lead to a conversation where the professor can say, well, actually, you know what, we can change that due date, or we can put it a little bit later. Even if the syllabus is set up, students don't have a problem with things having to be submitted like 2 days later. So this is a conversation that you may want to have with the professor. So in terms of time management, you have a clear idea what is going to be expected. Also in terms of like, if you're going to be grading, and we will talk about that later, be sure that you have rubrics. That would allow you to spend less time trying to figure out how are you going to give a point or take away a point in a specific paper. And we'll talk about this a little bit more because you shouldn't be grading alone, and there should be some grading from the professor. Other problems could be, for example, that I feel the TA tasks that I'm given are menial. So things where you feel that, you're just, checking links on Canvas and things like that. And that you want to do something more substantial. Again, a conversation with a professor saying like, hey, I love, I like to do this, but, these are menial tasks. And I think I have time and a space to do something a little bit bigger and explore what other things you could do with them. For example, grade together or prepare some activities for synchronous work, or even like saying, hey, great, I'm doing all these menial tasks. You don't have to say menial, but repetitive or not that meaningful. And can I prepare a guest lecture? And at least, that way you will have a guest lecture that you can put in your CV. And then the other question is, the other problem is you're not able to keep up with the workload that you're giving as a TA. Again, that comes back to the expectations at the beginning and alignment of what is expected from you. What I'm trying to say is that communication is key. So you need to also, from the beginning, to understand how to best communicate with a course professor. Is it meetings? Is it through phone calls? Is it through text? Is it through Slack? Is it through chat in Teams? Is it through email? Whatever it is, you should ask them what works for quick questions. They may prefer a text or an email. And longer messages, for example, where that may require a meeting. It would be a good idea to schedule, and that's something that I always do with my TAs, to schedule a standing meeting every week. It doesn't have to be an hour, it could be half an hour, just to check in, to double check that everything is going well, and that, if you have questions as you're going on, that they are solved. Especially also because those meetings could be also developmental for you. The professor could use them to tell you about why he chose this activity or why it's important to take into account this theory and things like that. In relation to the communication with the students, you should also let the students know what is the best way to reach you, whatever you prefer, Canvas, email, text, when to expect a response from you, and to set boundaries. Tell them that you may be slow to respond after hours or on the weekend, or that you are not going to respond during the weekend at all, that for that you have due dates and that if they need answers. And also figure out if you want to set up standing office hours that people can come in on Zoom or in person. And then there's a possibility of you working with at least one other TA. So in that case, again, communication and ensuring alignment is important. How do you grade? How do you provide feedback? And how you support one another? That is very important, especially when you may have problems with the workload, like that you feel that there's too much and they're not doing enough. Maybe they're grading in a different way. So alignment is really important because that's just telling us that there's some kind of problem with how we manage things. Also, make sure you have an easy way to correspond and to check with each other. And then also, as I was saying about the due dates and the alignment of your workload and the workload from the TA duties, set due dates with the professor about when each of you will finish your tasks, especially if they're related, like if they're consequent, like, or dependent on each other. Like I cannot grade the second part of the assignment until you grade the first part of the assignment. So those have to be very clear. And the professor should be on the known about that. Okay, now the most important part is that as a TA, you're going to probably be grading your friends and peers. So what could be best practices to avoid potential problems about that? If something sometimes it's very hard to give a friend, especially one that you know that is smart, because we're all in grad school. We're all like super. And but the grade isn't great. Maybe they didn't, they were not able to put their best work forward. And you actually need to keep things as objective as possible. So one thing that I do all the time is that I anonymize submissions. So I never know who I am grading as a professor, not even as a TA, because we know that there's a halo effect in relation to how people show up in class. This is a person that never has their camera on, so like whatever, like it's probably not very engaged. So the way that I'm grading that is going to be different from the person who's always like very like peppy and in class making comments and super interesting. I may be grading them in a more positive light. So that's why I always anonymize all the submissions as much as I can. And there's teamwork where they're doing like a case study or a organizational study, and I know who's working there. But for exams, for example, I make them anonymous. Multiple choice, they're great for grading for TAs because you just apply a template and you go like, yes, no, yes, no. But if they're short answers or essays, never grade on your own. At least grade like 10% with someone else, double check that it's aligned, double check that you are in agreement, and then you can continue grading solo if you kind of double grade everything that you do. And then, as I was saying, always work on rubrics with the professor in advance. Grade a couple of assignments with the professor using the rubric, double checking that the way that you use the rubric in the assignment, because sometimes rubrics are as useless as not having a rubric if they're not well done. Double check that the grade allocation is fair, and also double check that what you're grading on the rubric is related to the learning outcomes. I know that this is actually that the professor should be doing. But a lot of you have done our courses. A lot of you know about things like Bloom and student learning outcomes, like the Bloom taxonomy that tells you about what are the different type of learning outcomes that we're looking for when we're creating, grading an assignment. So what we not want to know is what type of learning are we facilitating and measuring with that assignment. So the learning outcome is what the student should know or be able to do by the end of the course. And each student learning outcome should be a single observable and measurable outcome. And that's where the rubric plays a role. So when you're providing feedback and grading, remember that that feedback and that grading should be aligned with the student learning outcomes that are given for the course or for the unit. If you start, like realizing that the feedback that you're giving is not related to student learning outcomes, you may want to check with the professor and go like, how is this, or how is this? Maybe it's just an assignment. The way the assignment is set up, it doesn't actually allow you to provide feedback on the learning outcomes. You're providing feedback on, I don't know, like the ability to reflect, but then maybe not on the learning outcome. So double check that when you're doing the grading. So it's very, very important, as I said, to use very specific rubrics. And if you feel that the professor has provided a rubric that is too general, create one that is more specific. You can do it by grading a couple of assignments at random, making the rubric a little bit more specific, and then going back to the professor and saying, this is what I'm doing. Is this okay? Okay. So what you need to know is to know how much each element of the response is worth and what the correct answer should be. For example, if a compare and contrast question is worth 5 points, like how are you going to allocate those points? So you may allocate 1 point for defining key terms, 2 points for comparing the terms with at least 2 reasons, and then other 2 points for contrasting the terms with at least 2 reasons, right? So you may want to go to that level of specificity because you need to actually have, like, imagine that someone that is very picky is going to come to your office hours and is going to ask you, why did you discount 1.5 from this? So you need to be able to say, well, because this is my rubric. And I always ask the professor to double check any grading that you are unsure of. You are not the final decision maker, it's the professor. So if you're unsure, just give it to them. Provide feedback about what exactly was wrong, because people learn from mistakes. So try not to just to give points, but also say why. I know this is starting to be a lot of workload, right? Like this is going to add to your hours. And again, that's why it's important that you need to align your hours. When are you grading, and how is that related with when are your own things due? So keeping it first is important. Not only the outcome, but the process. That you use a process with everybody in the same way. And because you need to show, that's what we call in organizational psychology procedural justice. So you need to show that your process is just. In order to show that, you need to explain it to students. So you always can actually explain to the students in your class that are going to be your peers, some of them your friends, what are the best practices that you're using to grade. Then, oh my God, there's this other thing, teamwork. Almost any time there are group projects in class, and there are problems with group dynamics, there are problems with potential external stakeholders if the group involves a community project or an organization project. So it's going to happen. You're going to have at least one team that is going to have problems. So brace yourself and breathe. That's the first step. Then, second step, make sure to meet with the team members frequently. Even when they're quiet. Actually, when the teams are quiet, that is a worse, because that means that something is happening and they're not saying anything. So try to stay in the know, and avoid finding out last minute that the team is dysfunctional. There's nothing more frustrating than learning that the team hasn't been working like the last day before the assignment is due. You cannot do anything about it. And if that happens, then you have to, elevate to the professor going like, hey, I just learned this. What are we going to do about this? I learned last semester about that. And I was like, I think it was 2 days before the due date. And I was like, fine, just do 2 individual assignments. Like, it looks like you have been working separately anyways. So meet each and we'll figure it out. As a professor, I'm considering that this is something that I have to now implement in my syllabus and put as a learning outcome that they need to learn how to work in teams. So, there's like a little bit of an accountability and an alignment between what I'm expecting from them, what is that I'm expecting that they learn from the teamwork, and how I can solve problems with dysfunctional teams. It's really important that people feel that they are heard and respected, even if you think that they are not right, or that they have a misconception of how things should have gone. So always make sure to always let people share their point of view, and especially when the students in the class are people that you know. So you may have preconceived notions of how this person works usually in teams. You have worked with them in the past. Just let them express their point of view and try to be a little bit more objective. And also remind people about how team projects are in terms of value, because they give them the opportunity to apply their learnings and how other groups apply learnings as well. So try to get them there. But what is the most important thing for me is that you actually meet with them frequently and double check with them that things are going well. So you can, ask the professor, hey, this team is not working well. You may want to work with them or meet with them. Before going on, it's not your responsibility to make the team work well. It's your responsibility to double check that things are happening and that they're going well, but it's actually the ultimate responsibility about the course and how the course functions is the professor. So they don't take on more responsibility that you actually owe the professor or the students. There's a lot of dilemmas when you're TAing, again, because you're TAing with peers, with friends. So there's a couple of them here that I wanted to ask you to see if you're willing, actually. to answer a couple of questions, and you can answer on the chat if you don't want to speak up. What would you do if you disagreed with the professor's style of teaching? I'm going to read all of them, and you tell me something about one that resonates with you, because maybe like it's like kind of like, well, I don't know, I just do whatever I have to do and hope for a better professor next time. There are difficult and sensitive topics brought up in class. How do I navigate the conversation? The students are getting upset that I'm grading their assignments rather than the professor. I really like a student in the class, and I'm inviting them for coffee every week, and they always say that they are busy. I'm suspicious of plagiarism in a student's work. The student needs are being met by the professor, and they're coming to me, are not being met by the professor, and they're coming to me to fill the gap. Students want me to be the mediator or the advocate to the professor, especially with friends. And I have very good friends in class, and other students are upset because we go for drinks afterwards. So do you want to speak to any of this? Do you want me to speak to any of this? You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute. Shelby, which one resonates more with you?
Yeah, I in the chat I said that maybe for the plagiarism one, I would document why I thought it was plagiarism and then take that to the professor and see what they wanted to do with the plagiarism before talking to the student.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a lot of these come back to the idea that you're not the ultimate responsible person. And in terms of plagiarism, you should document and provide, kind of like the signs of what you think you're suspecting it, but you shouldn't be accusing anybody of plagiarism until a conversation is happening. There's a couple of them about going for coffee or drinks with friends that resonate with me. And I think that I would always say, for example, with a student that you really like in the class, I would say if you want to socialize with them, try to invite everybody, like everybody in class, to go for coffee. So it's not something where you're isolating them. The student may be perceiving that they have power, that you have power over them because you're grading their assignments, or you're related to the course, and they may feel that they cannot say no. So always give an out in terms of like, well, we're going, more people are going, or just sit and wait until the class is done, and then you don't have any power or any influence over the student, and then invite them for coffee afterwards. The same thing with other students are upset because we go for drinks with my very good friends. Well, invite everybody if you want to go, or hold on those drinks after class, or maybe just do it on the weekend so nobody sees that you actually are socializing with your friends.
Looks like we have
Shelby?
there's a hand up.
Oh yeah, Hannah.
Yeah, hello. I just wanted to add a point regarding students' needs are not being met by the professor. I think if there is a good communication between the TA and the professor, the TA should drag the attention of the professor that there is some need to be focused on with the students on this regard. And they can agree if this is not taken care of by the professor, then there would be some responsibilities moved to the TA, and he or she can take care of this. So this need to be discussed between the TA and the professor, not in front of the students, of course, but it is something in the beginning when they first had the meeting to establish the boundaries and the relationship in the classes in the term. So I think this need to be taken care of.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, that's a perfect response to that dilemma. And I would actually add that if you need to have that conversation, you actually can have it in relation to the hours that you're spending and how, for example, well, last week I was meeting with the students about this issue, but I'm also grading. As you know, I cannot spend more than 10 hours, so we have to figure this out. So you can always talk about it from a perspective of like hours, that you cannot do all of those things, and to manage that workload, and not to avoid this feeling or a hard conversation, difficult conversation where you have to tell the professor you're not doing your job, right? Like, or you're not, so you have to be careful with that.
Exactly. If you may also, I need to add another point regarding the students want me to be their mediator or advocate to the professor. I think it is, I will not use the word mediator or advocate exactly, but it is one of the TA responsibility is to hear students when they want in some office hours. And if there is a necessary to take these points to the professor and to talk with him or her regarding these points, it would be something between the TA also and the professor. So it is something related to the previous point, I think. And actually, all the points are connected to each other. But these 2 points I talked about, I think they are really attached to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be like something to discuss between the TA and the professor. And as you said, it is not something that I would go and say, it is your job to take care of this. Of course not. But it is something by clarification and just to talk about what things that TA can take care of or not. It's only that thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that what you were saying about the wording, right? The mediator and the advocate, that's actually what makes it a dilemma. You don't have to be a mediator. You don't have to be an advocate. You just have to
Exactly.
be able to transfer the information. But when you start using like specific names of specific students and asking the professor to take into account that this student has this problem and that you would do this, then that's when you're starting to cross the line of becoming a mediator or an advocate that you shouldn't be, because you're just a TA. You can always provide contextual information, but only information that the student has allowed you to share, and only if you feel that the student doesn't feel safe to share himself or themselves with the professor. Like, it's always dependent on the situation, but always be careful of safeguarding the confidentiality of the comments that the students make to you, and vice versa, or that the professor makes to you about the students. Okay. Any other ones that you want to discuss?
I have a quick question, Gloria, that you could probably answer. What should a TA do if they're confused about what they should do? Who can they go for help if they don't want to talk to the professor because they're potentially having trouble communicating with their professor or they feel uncomfortable?
Yes. So especially when there's a student problem.
Yeah, when there's like a student problem.
So first of all, well, there's a couple of things. So there's Title IX issues. If they're related to sexual harassment, gender discrimination, all those issues, if they are given to the professor is a mandatory reporter. So you may want to use confidential sources of reporting before going to the professor. And that's very important because professors are mandatory reporters. Once that information is in their hands, you don't have any control over that information. So that's one. And then the second thing is there's a form in the Dean of Students where you can always share a concern about a student. So I'm going to try to get in here, Dean of, and see if I find it. It's not easy to find. I don't know why the website is so complicated sometimes, but well, it's actually very easy to find. If you put Dean of Students CGU, it says share a concern, is the first thing that is there. So there's a bias report form, there's a sexual harassment and sexual misconduct form, but this one, the non-academic student grievance, but then the iCare is really just a regular form where you actually submit like what is the thing that you think that you're worried about. And that triggers the Dean of Students office to figure out what's going on with the student without having to go through the professor. And I think that that's very important that you know about this form. If you actually don't know even like what type of form you have to do, like you're like, I don't know if it's bias, I don't know if it's, just go to the iCare form, that is this one, and report it there, and then they will know what to do. Thank you for that question. That is a great question. We should put it in the webinar. Okay, so now we have like some time for you to ask us questions. So what are your questions? You can write the chat questions that you can ask professors. Oh, what are your questions? You also can you write in the chat questions that you want to ask professors this week? In terms of like what are you going to be asking them? And also you can write in the chat questions that you should have asked professors before deciding to TA for them. And if not, okay, so I have a private message, but I think I can put it in a way that is confidential because I'm not going to say who sent it. There's a class from 1 to 5, 1 day a week. If I work after the class for more hours, should I need add in the workday system? So the time that you are in the class is paid work time. So if you're in a class 1 to 5, those 4 hours, you have to put them in the workday system. And the time that you spend afterwards, like maybe because the students want to talk to you and ask you more questions, those also go into the workday. Every single hour that you're interacting with the students during class or interacting with the professor, those are paid work hours that you have to put in workday. It may be that you go over 10 hours that week, and that means that another week that you don't go over 10 and you do 5, that will balance out. But you need to put everything in there. Okay. More questions? Well, if you have more questions, you can send us an email. Oh,
Here's one.
Another one. Yay. How can a new student secure TA positions in the department? Well, that's going to be depending on each department. Each school is different. Usually the positions are posted in, Shelby, help me, what is the name of the system?
Handshake.
Handshake. So those positions are there. You can also try to talk to your professors with whom you have taken classes with before and volunteer saying, hey, if you're interested on having a TA, I would be interested in doing it. I enjoyed your class and I learned a lot and I would love to do it again for you as a TA. I think that those are the most effective ways of doing it. Shelby, can you think about something else?
Yeah, I think like especially it's really hard when it's your first semester to get a TA-ship just because the professors don't know you. But I think putting an effort to get to know the professors performing well in the class, and then towards the end of the class, when they're starting to think about the next class, is a good time to approach them or email them and say, I'd really like to continue working with you. I think that's the best way to secure a position.
Yeah. And honestly, it's really hard to TA your first year. Because usually if we were in an institution, or if you are in an institution where there's undergraduate classes, then it is easier because you're a grad student and you can TA undergraduate classes. Here, you are TAing graduate classes, so you at least have to have some kind of experience with the topic. So even if you haven't, and if you do have that kind of experience, you can again have a meeting with a professor who's going to be teaching that next semester, that topic that you're very interested in, and you did a honors thesis or something about it, and kind of provide them with information about how you're an expert on that area and how you would be a good fit for TA in that course. You're welcome.
And I would just add, if you all have more questions about TA issues, please feel free to make an appointment with us or with one of our fellows if there's questions we didn't have time to get to today.
Yeah, and I have put on the chat again a quality survey for you to answer in terms of your satisfaction with this webinar. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you so much for also watching this recording. And just let us know if you have questions over the semester, any problems that you may have. You always can come to us. Our emails are gloria.gonzalez@cgu.edu and shelby.lamar@cgu.edu. And you can always make an appointment as well in our website. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.